Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. It's the fourth Wednesday of the month, and that means it's time for our bird notes. Joining us is bird expert and conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont, Mark LaBarr. Great to see you.
Always
again.
great to be here.
So our focus today is on a couple of birds whose names are a little bit of a tongue twister. That's the golden-winged warbler and the blue-winged warbler. Awesome, I got them. Tricky to say, but beautiful birds.
They are, and a focus for a lot of Audubon Vermont's work in the Champlain Valley.
Right, how interesting is that? So how long have you been doing this, and tell us about this species?
Probably since about 2012, 2013 that we started focusing our work on it. We'd always been working in the Champlain Valley, and then golden wings and blue wings, which are declining species, both on the species of greatest conservation need. This is a classic golden winged right here, and you can see where it gets its name. And these species use the Champlain Valley, so we've been working with landowners to manage habitat to keep them around.
Fantastic. And so
here's our blue wing.
Okay.
So you can see a little bit different. You know, it's got that blue shade, and instead of that golden panel, it has two white wing bars. So they, again, they're species that kind of use the same habitat, but really, really interesting species too.
So are they slightly different from each other? Do they mate? Is there
hybridization? Yeah, so that's what makes them kind of a unique species, or two different species to work with, is they do hybridize. They sing each other's songs. And what they found recently is that these two species are 99.97% genetically the same. And so here you can see golden-winged warblers. The genus is Vermivora, which means worm eater. And you can see the blue-winged warbler tends to have is the dominant species, and golden-winged warblers down in the lower left-hand side have the recessive genes. And so we get all sorts of different combination. Here, for instance, is a classic picture. You can see the great golden wing panel has all the facial markings of a golden wing, but there, right on its breast, you can see a little bit of yellow. And so that suggests probably that it has some genetic material from blue-winged warblers as well.
Is that putting the yellow-winged warblers, or the golden wings, at risk?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because the hybridization has always been thought of as something that is causing golden-winged warblers to decline even further. But as this new genetic information comes out, people are starting to look at the Vermivora genus, the complex as they call it, as a broader component. And here in Vermont, like I said, we work to manage habitat for both of those species. And we're right in that hybridization zone, so we see all sorts. Like I said, it's a great bird to work with, but lots of questions.
Right. So you were talking to me about earlier, like one is kind of like a recessive gene.
Yes. Yeah. So that golden-winged warbler and the Lawrence's warbler, which is the other primary hybridization, tends to carry the recessive genes, whereas that blue-winged warbler and the Lawrence's warbler, which is also a hybrid, the Brewster's warbler there in the upper right, which is also a hybrid, tend to have that more dominant gene. So there's a lot of questions, but for us here in Vermont, it's all about protecting the habitat for these species, so we work hard to do that.
Well, let's talk about that. How do you do that?
So both these species, we find them in old field habitat. We find them in that classic overgrown farm field that has a mixture of grasses and forbs and shrubs. And for us here, it's really important that we have a forest component to that, as the birds use that forest component, especially the males. So this kind of shrubby habitat is perfect for both golden-winged warblers and blue-winged warblers. The birds nest very close, if not on the ground. So the females will take advantage of a central stalk of something and build their nest down at the bottom. And they're interesting in that there's some research that shows that when the fledglings leave the nest, that the males move with the male golden-winged warbler to the forest, and the female stays behind with the female young. So having that combination of forest and old field is really important. And we find a lot of that here in the Green Mountains, I mean in the Champlain Valley, especially when you come up against the Green Mountains. So Heinsberg, Charlotte, Middlebury, Cornwall, West Haven, towns like that seem to have quite a few of these birds. Yeah.
Key habitat
Yes.
for these birds.
Yeah.
What other species benefit from that kind of habitat?
So this young forest or shrub habitat that you might see, you know, there's a whole suite of species that are associated with that, from thrashers in the upper left there to towhees, eastern towhees below them, field sparrows, prairie warblers. Many people know the American woodcock, which is also known as the timber doodle. Yeah. These are all species that benefit from this habitat structure and type. And you know, when we think about mammals, things like bobcats also benefit from them. There are species like turkey and grouse. So it's a key habitat type here in Vermont, and one that, as I said, we actively work with landowners at Audubon, Vermont to try to maintain that habitat for them.
So how do you do that? How do you work with landowners around
So
maintaining this?
if that habitat's available and it's on a landowner's property, there's a number of different financial incentive programs that are out there through the Natural Resources Conservation Service in order to do a lot of primarily invasive species removal of invasive plant species like honeysuckle and buckthorn. And that seems to create the habitat type that that these birds like and these animals like. And so we're, you know, the combination of the two will work with landowners and hopefully figure out a way to maintain that shrub structure over time.
But another reason to get rid of that buckthorn and honeysuckle, because that's not
It's a nice combination because we are you know, taking away those invasives. We manage for natives like viburnums and dogwoods and other shrubs which provide a higher energy source for birds in general anyway. And so, yeah, by taking away the invasives, it seems to work on both sides.
Great. And so what research are you doing on these warblers in addition to your management work?
So, you know, back in 2014 when we first started looking, there weren't a lot of places where golden-winged warblers were thought to be seen in the southern Champlain Valley. And once we started looking, we started finding them all over the place. Golden wings, blue wings, and the hybrids. And so at that point we started asking questions, you know, we know where they are here, but where do they go? And so back in 2016 we did a project. Here's a golden-winged warbler with a little bit of it's a backpack that we put on called a geolocator. It tracks their movements and lets us know where they were wintering and where they spend their time in the winter months. And so we were doing this work with a professor from the University of Maine and a graduate student. And we found, interestingly enough, we also abandoned the birds.
Right.
This was a way for us to keep track of them. So when they did return, they have to carry these backpacks all the way down, bring them all the way back. Sometimes you can't see them on the back, but you can see those bands. And so this is how we went back out and looked for the birds with the backpacks. And
where do they go?
So we had a whole range of places. Here you can see, you know, our golden-winged warblers and blue-winged warblers. Mostly, all of our birds go to Central America, Costa Rica, Panama. A couple of our golden-winged warblers did manage to make it all the way down into Colombia, but it looked like they migrate along the Atlantic coast. They winter down in those Central American, northern South American countries, and then come back up through the middle of the country, and then back over to the Lake Champlain region.
Oh, interesting. And how far spread are these warblers? What you said, like Wisconsin to?
So the Vermont population is the easternmost and largest population of golden-winged warblers in North America.
Okay.
They do show up occasionally in the Connecticut River Valley, but we have the highest concentration. And they extend all the way across the Midwest as far as breeding, up into Manitoba and places like that. So the upper St. Lawrence River Valley of New York and into the upper Midwest is where you'll find a lot of these birds, as well as along the Appalachian mountain chain, so Pennsylvania, West Virginia, places like that.
And follow-up research, these new tags.
So, you know, what we did with that is we found that we had a sense of where these birds were going. We knew the habitat type that they liked. And now, in order to really further answer the question of what that habitat structure is, both the forest and the shrubs, we've been putting nano tags. Again, another little backpack. This is a temporary backpack, so it'll fall off after a couple months. And we attach these to the birds. It's a transmitter, so it can be picked up by a receiver. And what we can then do is follow those birds as they go about their day and see where their home ranges are. And again, that habitat structure, so we get a better idea where we can focus our management work.
So you're really getting to have a sense of how they're using the Champlain Valley.
Right.
And so tell us about that and why that's important.
So, you know, these are declining species, and there's a host of other species that are associated with them, as we spoke before. And the southern Champlain Valley is part of a focus area for golden-winged warblers. We're working with funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to manage for these species. We'll be looking at the northern Champlain Valley next year. And since this is the largest, you know, population for golden wings in the east, it's, you know, we have the ability to, again, just keep that habitat available for them.
Cool. We're all out of time, Mark. Thank you so much
You're
for talking to
very,
us about these wonderful warblers.
You're very welcome.
And if you have bird-related questions or want more information, please contact Mark. You may write him at the Audubon, Vermont, 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington, and the zip is 05462. You can also email Mark. The address is there, mlabarr@audubon.org. Send him your questions, and he'll try to answer them in an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. And once again, thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.